In this chapter, we'll take a close look at a very powerful component in the Kendo UI library called Chart. This highly configurable and dynamic component makes data visualization a snap, but because it's so powerful, there are many features and configuration options to consider. The Kendo UI chart uses modern web technologies to render high-quality data visualizations. All graphics are rendered in the client using scalable vector graphics, SVG, with a fallback to Canvas, in case SVG is not available, which is probably not the case as most browsers support it at this point. The data visualization library comes with Kendo, and it offers several types of charts, including basic charts, sparklines, which is an inline element, a stock chart, and a hierarchical data visualization widget called Tree Map. The RPS application will use a basic chart. This should give you a good idea of how to configure and update any of the charting widgets available. We'll start off the chapter by taking a look at the anatomy of a Kendo chart. Then we'll dive right in and add a chart to the RPS dashboard as per the new requirements for visualization. We'll configure the chart in its simplest form and then extend the configuration with more available options. Let's begin. The Kendo chart is highly configurable and highly customizable. While all the configuration options are available on the Docs website, let's go through some of the major ones now and the ones we'll be using in this project. The title is the main label for the chart, and it can appear at the top or the bottom of the chart. You can control its position using the position option. The legend is a key to the chart. It labels and color codes all the different series that are going to be displayed on the chart. It can also be controlled by the position property, and the legend can be on the top, bottom, left, or right. We'll use both the title and the legend in our chart. A chart has several axes, and a Kendo chart supports multiple types of axes. For a categorical chart, this is a chart showing categories. The categorical axis is the x-axis. It's the axis running along the bottom, and it treats date objects specially. If the array containing categories that's bound to the category axis is an array of date objects, the Kendo chart automatically detects that. It finds the lowest and the highest date in the dataset and automatically and chronologically plots out the dates from start to finish. Don't worry about this sounding confusing right now. This is exactly the type of chart we'll be creating in this chapter, so you'll see an example of it. And finally, series. Think of series as the actual data that's going to be plotted. You can plot multiple series on a chart, as we're going to be doing in this chapter, and you can also have different types of series for different types of looks. If we go to the charts section in the documentation, you'll see an example of a Kendo chart with two series items in a series array specified. This example shows a categorical chart where the categories are years and the series are bar charts with data plotted against the years. Now I say bar chart because you can specify different kinds of series. If we take a look at the chart types here, you'll see all the different series that are available. Area charts, display charts that look like this with the area filled in. We're going to be using something called a bar chart that looks like this. There's also bubble charts and line charts and a few other ones. Looking at this line chart, you can see an example of multiple series here where you have the World series and the United States series plotted on one chart. Now I mentioned there are different kind of axes that the Kendo chart supports. The category axis is something we're going to be working with in this course. And there's also the value axis. That's the y-axis right here. The Kendo chart supports multiple value axes as well in the same chart. We're not going to be working with an example of multiple value axes, but I just wanted you to know that that's available as an option. That's a brief introduction to the anatomy of a chart. We've just scratched the surface of everything that's available, and hopefully you'll get a good idea of how to manipulate charts and how to use these most important elements that we've just talked about. The rest you can pick up from the documentation and the examples provided. Along with this documentation, I also recommend that you take a look at the demos for the chart, as they'll give you other ideas about how you can display data. All right, well, we've talked enough about the different parts of the chart. It's better to learn by doing. So let's add the chart to our application. Right now, we have a dashboard page that has an active issues section. This lists numbers for the active issues, the closed issues, and the open issues. We want to represent this data in a chart format. And this space under all issues is where our chart is going to live. Let's take a look at the code. In the source folder, in page dashboard, here's the dashboard HTML file. And right over here, we have the active issues section. And if we scroll a little bit further down, you'll see the all issues H3 label right here. This is where our chart is going to live. To create the HTML for the chart, we don't need anything else other than just a div. So let's create a div and give it an ID. And just to make it simple, I'm going to call this chart. It's the only chart that we have here, so I don't think I'll mistake it for any other chart. And that completes our HTML setup. Pretty simple, huh? Let's head out to index. This is where we're going to import our charting modules. Now, because we've installed Kendo UI, the full library, and not just core, we can import the data visualization modules, including chart. So I'm going to go to the top here, and I'm going to import progress, Kendo UI, JS, and this one is not going to be Kendo chart, as you'd think. This one's actually going to be kendo.dataviz. And in that namespace, you can see a few different things available: barcode, diagram, QR code, and so on. We want the chart. So let's go ahead and import chart. And as usual, let's go down to our document ready event. This is where we're going to instantiate the chart. Right down here, I'm going to use jQuery selectors to select my chart div. And I'm going to convert this to a Kendo chart. So far, so good. Let's take a look at this. So with just that little amount of work, I already have a functional chart on my page. You can see that we have a chart area, which is the full chart, including the labels, the legend, the title, which we don't see yet because we don't have one yet. That's the chart area. The plot area is just what's plotted on the inside. Let's take a look at what we can add here without having any data just yet. So let's go back to the code. And just like any other widget in Kendo, we can provide options to this Kendo chart. This time I'm going to do it inline. First of all, I'm going to provide a title. Let's call it all issues. And there's a title right there. Now I know that I'm duplicating the title here and here, but that's okay. I want to demonstrate what a Kendo chart title looks like. So we're going to keep that. I mentioned chart area and plot area, and that might confuse some of you what the difference is between those two. So let's quickly talk about that. The chart area is the entire chart, including the title, legend, everything that's rendered by Kendo chart widget. And this can be styled. For example, let's change the background, and I'm going to use something really ugly just to prove a point. I'm going to make it red. So there's the chart area. There's also something called the plot area. And the plot area has similar options for styling. Let's make the background green so we can see where the border between the two lies. So the chart area is everything, and the plot area is only what's inside where the plotting takes place. I wanted you to know what the difference is. We don't actually need those, so we're not going to use them. The other part of the chart that I mentioned is the legend. We'll get back to that once we have some data showing, but right now I can just specify the legend, and this also has quite a few different options for styling. I want the position to be set to bottom. So this is how simple it is to initialize a chart, but how do we get the data to show up on the chart? In this lesson, we're going to get some data into our chart. Let's take a look at the finished chart so we know what our goal is. The finished chart plots dates on the bottom. This is the categorical chart, so it has a category axis. Remember, these dates are calculated automatically. That's something I mentioned in the beginning. And we have two different series in here, two different data points, closed issues and open issues. Open issues are shown in red and closed issues are shown in green. So we'll get to all this. Another thing to note is that this chart is responsive. So anytime I tap on the filter, we get new data and the chart updates. Also, if I change an assignee here, the chart also updates. So we need to respond to data changes. Let's head over to the code. And we know that data actually is queried from the database by our model. So let's open up the dashboard page model. And right over here is the refresh function. This is where we're going to call our data updates. So how are we going to store the data and share it with the chart? Well, let's go up here to the top. And now we need a place to store our data, a responsive property of the model. Here's an example. We have status counts that we're already doing this with. So we need something similar to that. It's going to be a public property called data for chart. We're going to have a $$ appended to it to signify that it's a RxJS observable, and it's going to be a behavior subject. Let's go ahead and instantiate it. And initially it's going to be undefined. So now that we have data for chart here, we're able to monitor and subscribe to changes that take place for data for chart from index. So let's go up here, and we are already subscribing to users. We're subscribing to status counts. Now we just need to subscribe to data for chart. So dashboard, page model, data for chart, and we're going to subscribe to it. And anytime we get any data that's new, we're going to go ahead and update our chart. So you've already seen a pattern like this when we worked on the combo box and the users that we populated. That means we need to get a hold of the actual chart component, the actual chart object or the instance inside of this subscribe method. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to create a new variable called issues chart, and I'll instantiate it to null. And when we create the chart from the HTML div right down here, I can call the data function on it and specify what type of widget this is. It's a Kendo chart right here. And this will return to me the actual instance, which is the issues chart itself. So now I'll have issues chart and I'll be able to update its data programmatically right over here. But first I want to make sure that data is not null or undefined and that issues chart is not null or undefined. And then I'll be able to update the issues chart. And the way I do that is by calling the set options method. So here I'm going to set the options, and whatever update I do here is just going to refresh the chart. And these are going to be the same options that we can initially pass into the chart, but without having to recreate the chart every time the data updates. We create the chart only once, and that happens when the document is ready, and then we just update its data. We have data.categories. The other important property we want to fill in is series. Series is an array of series items. There are a few properties that we need to fill in for each series item. Of course, you can change any one of these properties, and there is a ton to pick from, but we need just a few of these. Name, here I'm going to specify open, and the data. Let's copy this object, and I'm going to copy it down here and make one that's called closed. And for the data, for the open array, I'm going to use data items open by month. And here I'm going to say data items closed by month. This will give me a good start for updating the chart. But we still don't have our data yet. We need to actually populate this data. And we can do that in our refresh function. Right now, we're calling the dashboard service and we're getting the status counts. But the dashboard service also has another function on it that's called get filtered issues, which also takes in a filter. So get status counts will update the active issues part of the dashboard page, and get filtered issues is going to update our chart data. But we want to call this at the same time and only update the page once. So each one of these returns a promise. What we're going to do is actually combine these promises and use promise all, which takes in an array of promise calls. So I'm going to copy this and paste it in here, comma, and as a second parameter, I'm going to drag this in there. So once both of these calls resolve, then I'll have my results and I can parse them out here. The first result in the array is status counts, and the second result is filtered issues. So results sub 0 is going to be status counts. That means I can just use this call right here, and I can pass in results sub 0. I don't need this part anymore. For the chart data, I have another function, and I'm going to call it update stats. And I'm going to pass in results sub 1. Let's go down here to the bottom, and I'm going to paste in my update stats function. As you can see, this is a bit lengthy, so I didn't want to type it out. All this does is parse the filtered issues that we receive from the API, and we update the data for chart property with the categories, the items open by month array, and the items closed by month array. So when we call next here, and we pass in all this data, our subscription that we've signed up for on the other page here is going to provide new data to the chart, and the set options function will be called for the chart. Okay, I'm going to save this. Let's take a look. And here we are. So we have some data being populated into our chart. Excellent. And let's see, is it responsive? Yes, it is. So when I tap on my filters up here, we get new data populated. And if I select a user, we also get new data. Excellent. There are a few things we need to fix up here as far as styling of the chart and the organization of our series. Our chart for the RPS tracker is using something called categorical series. Only the bar chart, the line chart, and the area chart from Kendo have support for displaying dates as categories. When you use the date objects as categories like we are using here, dates are distributed automatically and they're automatically calculated based on the data set. Grouping of categories into base units and series is also supported. See the documentation for more on that. We can control the category axis by specifying some properties for the category axis in a code. Let's go into the code and go down to where we initialize the Kendo chart. Here we're specifying the category axis, and since this is just the initialization of the chart, we're specifying the categories as a blank array, an empty array. We don't really need to specify categories here because it's an empty array and that's assumed, but for completion, I'm going to leave it in. Now we're able to affect how the chart looks by altering some of the category axis properties. And we're going to start with labels. So labels is its own object, a configuration object that has all these different options that we can specify for font color, format, margin, background. The interesting one I want to show you is rotation. Rotation can be a string or a number. Let's start off with a number. So if I put 35, for example, as the number for the rotation, you can see that our labels on the category have a slight 35-degree slant. And this could be useful if there are a lot of categories listed here. To demonstrate this, I'm going to add another property here called base unit. This will let us control whether we want to display months or weeks, and there's a few to pick from. Here are weeks, for example. So down on the bottom of the chart, you'll see that our categories are now date objects, but they're parsed by weeks. So for the full year worth of data, there are quite a few weeks here, and we need labels to be rotated a little bit in order to see them so they don't overlap. If I set this to 3 months, the weeks are spread out a little bit more, and they don't need to be slanted. So there's another setting that we can set for rotation that's going to automate the rotation of the labels for me, and I can set this to auto. So as you can see, the labels are rotated when there's a lot of them and they don't fit, but if there aren't that many and they can fit freely, the labels will not be rotated. I'm going to set my base units back to months, as that's the default, and I prefer the way that looks for this particular chart. The other part I want to change about the categories are the grid lines. The category axis has these major grid lines. These are the lines going vertically here, and I want to remove those. I can control that with the major grid line setting, and I can set its visible property to false. So if we take a look at that, now our chart is cleaner. All we have is horizontal lines here. So as you can see, a lot of the aspects of the way the chart is represented here and the categories are represented can be controlled with the category axis object. These are the ones I wanted to show you, but there's a lot more to pick from. So please take a look at the documentation for other options available. Let's take a look at controlling the series and the way they look. Well, we've configured a lot of the chart and we're getting our data back, but it's still not looking quite right. And we want to change the way the chart series are displayed. An easier way to visualize these is to stack these bars on top of each other. We can do this through a configuration property of the chart called series defaults. Let's go to the code, and right over here, I'm going to specify a property called series defaults. And inside here, we can specify stack to be true. Now, series defaults affects all the series. This is the one place where you can go to make wholesale changes for all the series that are defined here. Let's take a look at the stack chart and we'll come back to the series defaults to do some more updates. This is the way the stack chart looks. It's still a bar chart, but now we're stacking these items on top of each other, which lets you visualize quicker the relative size of each bar and the total for each of the months. A pretty useful chart type. Another useful property of series defaults is the type of chart. So for example, we can make this a line chart and our chart will be turned into lines. Another interesting one is called pie, and there's a pie chart. And this is an animated pie chart, which looks pretty nice, but I doubt the usefulness of a pie chart. So we're going to switch this back to bar. One other property I can set here is gap, and I noticed that the bars are very thin and they're far away from each other. So I can even control the gap between the bars by specifying gap to be pretty small, 0.06. Let's take a look at that. By the way, this is a bar type chart where the bars are horizontal. The type of chart I actually want is a column type chart. So there's a difference between bar chart and column chart as well. This is the type of chart I want. And as you can see now, with the gap being 0.06, the bars are thicker and they're closer together. This is still not looking quite right. Right now, the chart is inheriting a default theme, and there are many different themes for charts to choose from. You can refer to the documentation for the different themes available. We're going to be looking at themes later on in the course, but if you want to override the theme that we're currently using for displaying of the chart, we can do that right here as well by specifying theme. And I'm going to specify the theme as SAS, which will give it a flat look. There we go. Now the colors still don't match, and I can't specify the series default colors because I want each series to have their own color. So I'm going to go to the series array, and I'm going to specify the color here. So the color property for open items is going to be a string, and open items are going to be this reddish color, and the close items are going to be this greenish color. I also want them to be a little bit lighter, so I'm going to set the opacity to 0.7, which is going to make them just a little bit see-through. Now, you're going to notice something. When I save this and we go take a look at the chart, you'll see that the charts are not actually getting the colors that we've specified. Why is that? Well, we initialize the series items to be these two series items with empty data, but when we update the chart over here, after we get refresh data, we are completely resetting the series items. So this will go back to default. So what needs to be done is the series needs to be copied from here. And when we recreate the series, every time that we update the data, we need to pass along the color and the opacity here as well. So keep that in mind when you're updating the series items later on using set options. You need to update all the properties of all the series items. And now you can see that our colors are there now for the chart, and our legend also inherits these colors. Clicking on the filter updates our chart, so that means our data refresh is working.